What steps should be taken to set up diversity and inclusion policies in companies or in the workplace? What are the basic steps that anybody should consider when we can set up policies for diversity and inclusion?
Well, if I could jump in.
Yes, please.
Unfortunately, a couple of the things that I've been involved in recently, and with the Canadian Bar Association, which is like AMA, the American Bar Association, and they've sent out surveys, and we've attempted to get feedback on diversity inclusion, and a number of the comments have come back, we're just not interested in that as lawyers. We don't need it. It doesn't apply to us. And stop focusing our time and energy on that kind of thing. So, isn't that some form of denial, Gabrielle? Oh, what it is it's a different, older way of thinking, but it's also systemic. And I think that's one of the other parts that we're missing here is there are individual points of view, but a lot of those are created through systemic issues. And so even take policing, for instance, right, which is a hot topic everywhere. The systemic issues are real. And so when they're building policies and they build an inclusion policy, it's still going to be supported by all of those outdated, archaic processes and procedures and ways of putting those through. So you can't just come in with an ad hoc policy and hope that it's going to fix things. It will not. It will not do anything, and it will end up on a shelf. What you need is buy-in, and to points that have been made previously, the way to obtain that is communication, repetitiveness. And one of the things actually that we're working on here in Canada is, and I'm on the board of this, is creating a coalition for a new policing college, a national policing college that will be informed by those with lived experience in terms of that training and that systemic way of approaching things, so that we unpack that and start from the ground up.
Have you found, Elizabeth, please go ahead.
I was just going to tell her that she made a really great point. And I wanted to say that one of the challenging things, I think, in those bits of training, and it kind of addresses Katie's point a little bit about, why exclude yourself from the better world we can create together, is people need to be able to situate themselves in that. So you need to be able to recognize that, just because you don't have a characteristic that somebody else, it just doesn't mean that that's what held you back, right? Like, you can experience hardship as a white person, but it wasn't made work because of the color of your skin, right? Understanding how you fit in there, and that something terrible can be going on, and you could have benefited from, if it's that systemic discrimination or the unconscious biases of people around us, without you personally being responsible, but realizing that your awareness of that will contribute to shifting that change. And the more we're aware of those things in our daily lives and the way that we engage with people and teach our children and we vote, we're able to shift some of those attitudes. And then creating a workplace where we're able to do that as well. Actually being able to receive that information is particularly challenging, but we need to be able to do that.
Thank you, Elizabeth. We will go to Jessica in a moment, but Gabrielle, you made some points that have attracted a lot of comments. Madison Kind-Donahue says, a national college sounds amazing. And then Christine Bandy, oh my gosh, where can we get more information and hear updates about this new policing college? So that is coming through. I'm just getting some more viewpoints here from people who are watching all of us here and listening to you. Find the commonalities and celebrate the differences. Diversity is an attribute and an asset. Gabrielle, you want to say something about these comments quickly before we go to Jessica, please?
I do want to mention the commonalities. So it's really important. Now, some people will mention gender-based analysis when reviewing policies. Instead of starting from a gender perspective, I prefer to start from a mental health and physical health perspective when reviewing policies, because that is a commonality. It is something we all have. We are all on a spectrum of mental and physical health. And so if we start with those two things when reviewing our policies to ensure we're inclusive and diverse, then we can branch out to include religion, race, sex, all of those things, But again, that's starting where we can have a discussion and then making progress towards a solution.
Jessica, your perspectives again, please.
Sure. You have to be open to the conversation. So when you are discussing these issues with closed ears, you won't listen to the other person's perspective. You may be hearing them, but you're not necessarily going to listen. And in that vein, you have to come to the conversation accepting some truths. One of those truths is that we all have biases. So there is no pointing fingers saying only white people have bias, only Black people have bias. That's not the answer, and that's not the truth. Everyone has biases in some way. The fact that biases systemically hurt Black people and people of color in the United States and in the African diaspora, that's also a truth based on objective criteria. And so these are truths that we have to accept. We have to accept that everyone has privilege. I have privilege for various reasons, and for various reasons, I also don't have privilege. There are many times that I have appeared in places and people assume that I was an assistant as opposed to an attorney, despite the fact that I may have had a briefcase, a suit, but was dressed more professionally than other attorneys who were white men who were not dressed with a suit and tie. But so that's a bias that negatively affects me. And no matter where I went to school, no matter how professionally I might come across, that's always going to be a bias that I have to contend with. And so these are truths, and this is my truth. This is the truth for many women who experience bias in male-dominated fields. This is the truth for many Black women who experience bias in white male-dominated fields. And so we have to be open to accepting these truths, and we're not pointing or casting blame on anyone, but these are systemic issues, and we all have a role to play in these systems, in workplace systems, and people who come to the table have to be open and lean in and be intentional. And so I think there was a question from Katie. I'm looking at the comments, and Katie, okay. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. But when we talk about what our commonalities are and unpacking respect, that's just a core. I've never met anyone in my life who said, I don't want to be respected. And so for me, I had to say good morning to my mother, and she felt very disrespected when I did not say good morning. Yes. And that was a level of acknowledgement. That was me acknowledging her. I didn't think it was disrespectful for me just to go eat my breakfast, but she said, you're in my house. I paid for this food. You acknowledge me. And that was a level of respect. In DC, or if you're in New York City, Ben, I know that you are in New York. I don't know if people wave on the streets. And when you're in Virginia, people say hello, and that's respectful. In New York, it's not. And so these different conceptions of respect play out differently in the workplace. And when you're not exhibiting and communicating in the way that people within your workplace feel respected, you might think you're respecting that person, but you're not. And our interpretations of respect are colored by our cultural experiences, our life experiences, the ways, just many, many, many different factors. But I think cultural and life experiences inform the way that we exhibit and communicate respect.
For a moment, I felt like channeling my inner Aretha Franklin with R.E.E.C.P. and sing. For a moment, if I could get a keyboard behind me, I would probably be singing Aretha Franklin and respect for all of us. We are getting some wonderful comments. I'm sure you can read them, Gabrielle and Elizabeth, where you are. If you see any comment there that you want to approach, please feel free. But what we are seeing here, somebody gave a classic example in the issues that we should explore. Somebody is asking, how would you handle a situation where a colleague is being culturally insensitive, being sexist, being a bigot, being racist, or being homophobic? What would you advise anyone to do when somebody is in this position? Should it be a confrontation? Should it be calling the person out? How should we approach a situation like this? Because it seems these things are quite common in our lives these days. Who wants to have a go first, please?
I want to be the first to get that. I want to get that classic lawyer answer out and say it depends.
Exactly.
It really does. Like, I teach employment law at UBC, and my answer to almost all of their questions is it depends.
If the person is holding a gun, you have a different approach.
Yeah, I mean,
right?
don't. I mean, we just generally shouldn't have guns in the workplace. I think full stop. I think we can start there. I think it depends on your relationship with that person. First and foremost, your first step should be to realize that it's not personal about you. When someone is behaving in a way that is sexist, that is aggressive, that is homophobic, that is just really offensive, it's not a personal reflection on you. It's about them. So do that first and foremost, because we generally don't want people to experience hurt in this kind of stuff. I think your next step, hopefully you work somewhere that has policies and procedures around workplace bullying and harassment. Hopefully they've told you what you're supposed to do in this situation. Usually if you feel comfortable, you would bring it to somebody's attention. Depending on the response you get, you might want to escalate that to your supervisor, or there might be a designated person in HR that you could bring that to. And hopefully it will become a learning opportunity. If it's not a learning opportunity, I would make a point of documenting the things that go on in case situations escalate. That would be my advice.
Gabrielle, you want to chip in, please?
Yeah, I'm going to jump in from a little bit of a different perspective and just acknowledge up front that one of the best things about this question is it isn't about me. So everyone has a harder time, I think, standing up for themselves often than they do for others. And it's a benefit and a downside. Thankfully, there's been guidance published widely on how to deal with these situations even when you're out in public, when you see someone who's being denigrated. If you don't know the person, because sometimes there are large workplaces, ask them if they need assistance, because you need to be respectful of an individual's ability to stand up for themselves and their potential wish for privacy. Sometimes this is a very shameful thing for people, and depending on culture, you need to respect that. If you know the person and believe they want you to help, then stand up and speak up, right? That's something that's really important in such a way as to educate and not aggravate the situation in the moment. If the situation escalates, then try and remove the affected individual from the situation. And if you cannot leave, then get someone else involved, a supervisor or the police, depending on the scenario. So again, it depends. But it's also important to report the issue, because we need to know if this problem is individualized or systemic. And to Elizabeth's point, the role you play in the workplace allows you more power or less power, but reporting it is important.
I love something, Jessica, I love something Gabrielle said. Educate, don't aggravate. That's stuck in my brain, and then report the issue. Over to you, Jessica.
Yeah, so absolutely report the issue, and the company has a legal obligation, at least in the United States, to investigate that report. And you, as someone who has seen the conduct, you are a bystander, and you have the ability, you have the power to speak up. That is a hard power to use. As Gabrielle said, it's hard to advocate. I know that if I've ever felt disrespected, I'm a far better advocate for other people. I am fearless when it comes to advocating for other people. When it comes to advocating for myself, I find it terrifying, and I'm always baffled by that when I'm such a zealous advocate otherwise. And so it is very hard to speak up. If you, whether you're an attorney or not an attorney, it's hard to speak up. But I do implore you to, one, make sure that you're in a safe environment. If you are saying something to someone or confronting someone about behavior that you've witnessed, so make sure that you're safe. Make sure that you are not going to agitate the situation in any way in which it will become unruly or violent. But do speak up and say, I'm not comfortable with that. Stopping that behavior in its tracks by saying, this is not okay with me, because the person may have felt comfortable, may have felt that this was an environment where this type of behavior was tolerated. It's important to stop biased behavior when it's happening by noting that you're not comfortable with it, and then making a report.